Let's keep going on two-dimensional FK Ising and Ising. So remember yesterday I defined this, I took a graph and its dual. And I defined the dual configuration to a configuration omega. And I told you that, the key of today was to try to prove that the dual configuration, which is defined by the fact that an edge is open in the dual configuration if it's closed in the primal one and vice versa. What we need to prove today is that I did something, yeah. So proposition, if omega is sample according to random cluster model, FK Ising model of parameter P, then omega star is sample according to phi 1 on G star at parameter P star, where P star divided by 1 minus P star is equal to 2. So here we see again that P star star is equal to P, so it's a duality relation. But one thing I want to highlight here, which is important, is that if I start with free boundary condition, I end up with wired, okay? And vice versa. By the way, G star is just the set of, it's the graph with vertex set, with edge sets, which is the set of E star for E, an edge of G. Right? So you take all the edges of the dual lattice which are intersecting one of the edges of the primal graph, and then as a set of vertices, you just take the endpoints of these guys. Okay? I just want to be careful because it's not a standard definition in some sense of a dual graph. Why isn't it a standard definition? Because usually a dual graph is just defined by putting a vertex in the middle of every face of your graph, and then edges between between adjacent faces, basically. Between vertices corresponding to adjacent faces. So here's the only difference if you want to recover the primal graph, the standard notion of dual graph, is that you need to understand all those edges, all those vertices here, all those endpoints, as just being one vertex. So you just merge them. If you want, it's like you extend all of those to go like that. When you do that, notice that on this new graph, which is the true dual of the first one, the free and wired boundary conditions are the same, in fact. There is no boundary anymore. There is just one vertex here. But by definition, any cluster touching one of these points is touching this vertex, so they are all counted as one. Okay, so it's another way of seeing the wired boundary condition is just merging together all the vertices of the boundary. Okay, so let's try to prove this proposition. So there is a bijection between omega and omega star, so the probability that we don't know of omega star is equal to the probability of omega under this measure. So what do I need to do? I need to rewrite this measure in terms of omega star to see, this quantity in terms of omega star to see that it's equal to P star divided by 1 minus P star to the number of open edges in omega star, 2 to the number of clusters in omega star, this cluster counted as 1 when they touch this vertex. So when I start, I have this, then I have P over 1 minus P to the number of open edges to the number of edges in omega times 2 to the number of clusters in omega. So first thing which is easy is that the number of edges in omega is simply the number of edges in the original graph minus the number of edges in omega star, simply because it's the number of closed edges, the number of edges in omega star. So here, when I replace, I get a p over 1 minus p to the number of edges divided by z0 of gp. So this is a constant. And then I get 1 minus p over p to the number of edges in omega star. So this part is easy. What is a little bit more technical is to interpret this thing. Okay? So how can I express the number of connected components in omega in terms of omega star? Well, if you think about it, the duality thing is such that in this big graph, the violet one, the number of connected components for omega is exactly the number of faces of this graph. To each face of the graph corresponds a connected component of omega. So here, this is the number of faces in omega star. So how do we relate the number of faces to, well, we would like to relate it to the number of edges in my graph, to the number of connected components, to the number, say, of vertices. So there is a formula that does that for planar graph, and that's where we use planarity in a crucial way. It's Euler's formula. So by Euler's formula, which you can try to prove by just induction on the number of edges in your graph. You fix the number of vertices and you do an induction on number of edges. It's a very simple thing to obtain. Euler's formula is saying that the number of faces is equal to the number of clusters plus the number of edges minus the number of vertices plus 1. Yeah. And notice, you see, if you have 0 edge, it's a very simple formula to get, because if you have 0 edge, it means you have isolated vertices. So you have as many vertices are connected components in your graph as clusters, right? So this minus this cancels, and you get indeed one face, which is a complement of your points. And then when you add an edge, you just distinguish between the case where you add an edge between two Dijon clusters, or when you add an edge between two vertices that already belong to the same cluster, in which case you create a face. So you do, I mean, that's a very simple observation, formula. And here, when you replace this thing by what it gives you here, you get, so this didn't move. We still have the 1 minus p over p to the number of edges in the dual. You are going to get 2 to the number of clusters. That's absolutely perfect. That's what we want. And notice that it's the number of clusters in this big graph with the violet thing, which means it's the number of clusters in omega star when you count all vertices on the boundary as one, so it's k1 of omega star. Okay, so this is really important. This is k1. Then you have number of edges, so you are going to have an additional 2 here. Minus number of vertices, so you are going to have 2 to the minus number of vertices in the dual graph, and you get a plus 1. Okay? This whole thing here is constant. So let's call it Z. And here, by the formula that I express here, 2 times 1 minus p over p is just p star over 1 minus p star. This constant, since when I'm summing on every possible omega I get 1, this constant has to be the partition function of my measure, and therefore I get phi 1 g star p star of omega star. Okay? Notice that as a special case, imagine here instead of 2 I would have 1. Right? So I'm looking at the measure. If I put 1 here, I'm looking at Bernoulli percolation. Right? And in this case, this duality is completely straightforward. It's just, I mean, obviously if an edge, I mean, what's the distribution of this edge compared to the other and so on? Well, it's open if this edge is closed. So it's open with probability 1 minus p. And this is completely independent of other edges. So clearly, in the case of Bernoulli percolation, you recover just Bernoulli percolation of parameter 1 minus p, which is exactly what you get here. This equal to 1 implies p star equal 1 minus p. So it's a generalization of this, this duality. Okay, so corollary. Well, what do we deduce, or maybe first the definition, sorry. So a notation. There is a very special point, exactly like for the Kramers-Vanier duality that I left as an exercise. P equal P star will be denoted, so the point P equal P star is denoted PSD as self-dual. So it's a point which is invariant by the duality. And an observation is that what happens if I take a box of size n times n plus 1, etc., and I look at phi 1 p self-dual of this event. So the event is that there exists a path of open edges from left to right. Okay? Okay, maybe this is a terrible notation. That doesn't mean it's open. It was just to try to, maybe like that. So what can I say on the probability that there exists a path of open edges from left to right in the configuration? Let's start with percolation. If I take this for percolation, for Bernoulli percolation, when I can look at what is the complement of this event? The complement of the event that there is a path from left to right. Well, if there is no path from left to right, you can see that the right boundary, of the cluster of, like all the clusters that touch this left side, the right boundary is going to look like that. There's going to be edges that ends like that. And this, in the dual, there will be necessarily a path of open edges because they correspond to closed edges for my primal configuration. There will be a path of open edges in the dual configuration going from, well, the top of the dual graph to the bottom of the dual graph. So notice that the top of the dual graph notice that the dual graph of this graph is in fact something that looks like that. It looks like that. So it's edges that just go and exit by 1, and same thing like that. Etc. So the dual, the probability the probability of this event plus the probability of the event that in this dual graph like that, I have something like that. Is equal to 1, okay? But notice that when you draw this dual graph, existence of a path from top to bottom, well, those edges are useless for you because they end up nowhere. So you can erase all these edges. And you can add for free these edges here and these edges here simply because they won't change if they are open or closed. They won't change existence of a path from top to bottom. So here, it was a complicated way of drawing the fact that in a n by n plus 1 box, you have a crossing like that in the dual thing. Okay? So up to rotation, this and this are the same events. So for Bernoulli percolation, the argument then is quite simple. P, the self-dual point is 1/2. And you just say, well, here I have a 1/2 Bernoulli percolation, but here the dual thing is also a 1/2 Bernoulli percolation. The two events have the same probability. I win. This probability is 1/2. Here it's a little bit more subtle because this is the same as what? It's the same as phi 0, P self-dual. Let's put everything back like that. I just use the duality and rotate it to get one. So notice that here, when I do this duality, I do it in infinite volume. How do I get the infinite volume? Just I have the finite volume version for every box of size n. Just let n go to infinity. You obtain the the infinite volume thing. So the dual of the infinite volume wired is infinite volume free. So this plus this is equal to 1. And what does it imply? Well, it implies something slightly weaker than what you get for Bernoulli percolation, which is that crossing probabilities, well, for wired are larger or equal to 1, and for free are smaller or equal to 1/2, sorry, and for free are smaller or equal to 1/2. At this stage, we don't know that they are equal to 1/2 because the free and the wired boundary condition could be different. So here the only thing I use is that this measure is bigger than this one by monotonicity in boundary condition. So by monotonicity, I obtain that. Okay? So you can keep in mind, if you want, that they are equal to 1/2. And this would give you the argument, exactly the argument that we would use for Bernoulli percolation. But you are going to see that, in fact, just we are lucky enough, or let's say we did sufficient amount of work up to now, that these two inequalities are sufficient to conclude. Okay, so I think we are ready to prove our theorem. So proof of PC equals square root 2 over 1 plus square root 2, which is the self-dual point. Okay, first thing that we do, we say if PC is strictly larger than P self-dual, then there exists a constant C such that for every n, well, we have exponential decay, right? So that means that phi 1 lambda n P self-dual of 0 connected to the boundary is smaller than exponential of minus Cn. Okay? That is by exponential decay. Notice here that by monotonicity in boundary condition, if I consider the infinite volume measure, it is smaller than the finite volume measure with wired boundary conditions, right? This was due to the fact that the probability of increasing events was decreasing in n. Comparison between boundary conditions. Okay, but then phi 1 p self-dual of this, it's smaller or equal to the sum for x on the left of my rectangle of phi 1 p self-dual of x connected to x plus the boundary of the box of size n. Okay, one of these points here needs to be connected to distance n on the boundary, distance n of themselves. But these, they are here n plus 1 edges. And here, this is by invariance under translation equal to this. And therefore, this tends, as n tends to infinity, to 0. That contradicts this bound. Okay? So here the only important observation is that in order to contradict something, we had to work with the wired boundary conditions. If we would have had this only for phi 0, then, well, this thing maybe decays quite quickly. And in fact, it's not the case for the random cluster model, for the FK-Ising model, but for people who know the generalization of the FK-Ising model, which is the random cluster model, for Q strictly larger than 4, so it's just you replace the 2 by Q. For Q strictly larger than 4, this goes exponentially fast to 0. And this goes exponentially fast to 1. So it was really crucial here that we could use phi 1 and not phi 0. That's a parenthesis, but it's an important one. Okay. So this is a quite simple bound once you have exponential decay, but this is actually the historically difficult bound. This is the difficult part of the argument. The other part of the argument is usually done by a quite elegant argument by Zhang, which claims that, in fact, it cannot be that there is an infinite cluster in phi 0. So to prove the other bound, let us now prove that phi 0 p self-dual of 0 connected to infinity is 0. Notice that this implies that PC is larger or equal to P self-dual. For which reason, it's not that simple. It implies that because phi 0 is equal to phi 1 for almost every point. Right? I mean, here I'm just using that if PC was strictly smaller than P self-dual. Okay, maybe let me just draw this, explain this. If So it's a double parenthesis. If PC is smaller than P self-dual, there exists a P in between such that phi 0p is equal to phi 1p. But phi 1p, if p is larger than pc, is strictly positive. So what would you get? You will get that phi 0 p self-dual would be larger or equal to this. You get phi 0 p self-dual would be larger or equal to phi 0 p, which is equal to phi 1p of the existence of infinity, which is strictly positive. It's exactly like when we said that spin-spin correlations do not decay to 0 as soon as p is larger than pc. Well, it's exactly equivalent to say that phi 0p, I mean, the probability of having an infinite cluster is strictly positive as soon as p is larger than pc. It's exactly we actually use it in the proof. It was an intermediate step. Okay, so we are going to prove that. We are not going to use Zeng argument, because there is one thing I don't like in Zeng argument, which is that it used self-duality it used self-duality twice in some sense. First, because, well, you need this bound. Good, that you do need that. But he reuses self-duality in the proof, and this is not necessary to me. So what you want to do, in fact, is you want to say if you have a measure which has an infinite cluster, then the crossing probability tends to 1, which here is contradictory since the crossing probability of my measure is smaller than 1/2 for every. So I'm going to assume that phi 0 p self-dual is strictly positive, and let us show that phi 0 p self-dual of crossing probability tends to 1. Okay. So take a n by n plus 1 box, maybe 2n by 2n plus 1 if you don't want, maybe 2n by 2n plus 1, and here let's put them. I mean, this is really a tiny detail, but 2n by 2n plus 1, and take a box here of size k times k, which is centered on, which is the center of this square box. Okay? And observe that you can pick if there is a, I mean, if 0 is connected to infinity with positive probability, then there is an infinite cluster with positive probability, but the existence of an infinite cluster is an invariant of the translation event. So the probability is in fact 1 of having an infinite cluster. So I can pick k large enough that the probability of box of size k connected to infinity is larger or equal to 1 minus epsilon. Epsilon is something tiny. So you can take such a k, well, pick this k here. Okay? So first thing I want to do is I just want to say that the probability that there is a path from this box to this side in the square box is big. Okay? But notice that if I have that, then a fortiori I have that. There is a path from k, from the box of size k to the boundary of my box, or maybe I took a box of size 2n. That's just by inclusion of events. But now notice that the probability of having a path from this to the top is the same as the probability to have a path from this to the left, same as probability of having a path from this to the right, or for this to the bottom. So I have 4 events which have the same probability, for which the union of the probability of the union is 1 minus epsilon at least. So if you just know the union bound, you just deduce that these events have probability at least 1 minus epsilon over 4. But if you use the FKG inequality, so exercise, you can prove the following. You can prove that the probability of the max probability of the event AI when they are increasing is larger or equal to 1 minus the probability of the union of A1 to AS to the power 1 over S if all the events are increasing. So if all the events are increasing, 1 minus 1 minus. If all the events are increasing, you deduce that one of the events has a probability which is in fact larger than 1 minus the probability of the union to a certain power. It's called the square root trick, and it has a great advantage is that if this is of order 1 minus epsilon, this is of order epsilon, so that means one of the events has a probability which is at least 1 minus epsilon to a 1 over S. So in this case, one of the events, and they all have the same probability, has a probability of order 1 minus epsilon to a 1/4. So really remember this thing. This is completely elementary using FKG. It's manipulation using FKG, so I let you this as an exercise. But the square root trick implies that this thing is larger or equal to 1 minus epsilon to a 1/4. Okay? So here, if I take the translate by 1 of this box, and I ask that this translate is connected by a path to the right this time, well, the probability of both things happening at the same time is larger or equal to 1 minus 2 epsilon to a 1/4. Okay? So up to now, it looks very much like actually Zeng argument. It's kind of a Zeng argument from inside. But now, well, how do we conclude? Well, the occurrence of these two events doesn't imply that there is a crossing from left to right. But what is missing? If there is no crossing from left to right, that means that there are two disjoint clusters touching the boundary of this big thing and intersecting the box of size, say, k plus 1. But when n tends to infinity, the existence of these two disjoint clusters always intersecting the box of size k and going farther and farther away, by measurability, this converges to the existence of two disjoint clusters. So that means that the limit, or let's say the lim-inf, of phi 0 p self-dual of n, 2n plus 1, and crossing like that, where the lim-inf needs to be larger than 1 minus 2 epsilon to a 1/4, and this is by uniqueness of the infinite cluster. And that contradicts the fact if you take epsilon small enough, then this contradicts. that this thing is always smaller or equal to 1/2. Okay? So, I mean, remember this because I think it's a useful argument. It doesn't rely on duality. If you have a positive probability of, if you have positive probability of having an infinite cluster, then crossing probabilities tend to 1, period. There is no choice there. Well, that's the end of the proof. We proved that PC was equal to square root 2 over 1 plus square root 2. Okay? So notice that I really managed to spell out all the details of this proof, which in some sense is just because this is an old enough theory that we start to have the short proofs. Because this is like, Kesten's theorem is really a masterpiece of probability theory, and that was for Bernoulli percolation. So that was for a model which was which had independence. Here we work the whole thing with FK-Ising, which has dependencies, so which a priori is much harder to handle.
Isn't this actually Onzager's theorem?
So, it's Kesten for percolation, and it's rather Wu than Onzager, because it's actually the way that you derive, the way they were doing it with the exact formula. Sorry?
The statement.
But then the statement goes back even to Kramers and Vanier, right? So, there I think that there is a little bit of a mistruth that Onzager computed the free energy. That is true. By the way, without providing so much details, but actually, Brua Kaufmann was really the woman who did the heavy lifting there, because turning Onzager's computation into a rigorous proof was, he didn't help much. Like, he probably had a proof, but the original paper of Onzager on the free energy is like, here is the formula, and now I'm going to look at you trying to prove it for several years. So, but the way, the first physical, complete proof would be due to Wu, who actually extracted from it the magnetization, magnetization. Then once you have the magnetization, it's fine. Yes. Okay. But here, since I'm using the percolation type interpretation, I prefer to be doing the analogy with Kesten's theorem, because that's really what is driving our intuition. Okay. Let me give you a small candy, because you behaved for 5 lectures, so you stayed here. So I want to show you a beautiful argument due to Wendelin-Werner, which is an argument proving that the phase transition is continuous. So proving that, here I did prove that phi 0 of 0 connected to infinity is 0. Let's prove that phi 1 is 0. And this is harder because this is magnetization at the critical point equals 0. Okay, so just before we switch to other things, theorem, which again indeed is due to, let's say, Onzager, or there are a bunch of people, is magnetization at beta c equals 0, like the phase transition is continuous. But I'm going to use Wendelin Werner argument. And it's a very simple one, and it's based on these observations. So the observation is if phi 0, so we know that phi 0 PC of 0 connected to infinity is 0. I just proved it. But that means there is no infinite cluster at PC, and phi 0 is ergodic. So if there is no infinite cluster and phi 0 is ergodic, well, the mixing property of phi 0, in fact, if you think about it, directly implies the mixing property of mu free. So ergodicity of phi 0 PC implies ergodicity of mu free beta c. The only possible the only possible problem to deduce ergodicity for the measure for the Ising model would be the existence of an infinite cluster in FK Ising that would convey information like its sign to infinite distance. That would be really the problem, but since there is no infinite cluster, we are safe. Mu free is also ergodic. So why is it useful that mu free is ergodic? It's useful because it actually implies directly that there is no infinite cluster of pluses or minuses, let's say of minuses, for mu free. So consequence is that mu free beta c of 0 connected to infinity by minuses is 0. Let's denote it like that. Why? Well, exactly for the reason that I just proved. If this was positive, then I would be able to prove Burton-Keane. Absolutely no problem with that. We use very little on the percolation that we were using. So we could prove uniqueness of the minus infinite cluster. Then we will prove, well, that the crossing probability by minuses would tend to 1. But what is the complement of the existence of a path of minuses like that? If you have no path of minuses like that, then that means you have a path of, so now it's kind of site percolation. You have a path of pluses blocking it. And this path of pluses, notice that it's not even a true path of pluses, it's also allowed to go diagonal. But this is a fortiori simpler. Put it another way, if I have a path of pluses, a true path of pluses like that, definitely I don't have a true path of minuses like that. And here you should take n by n, by the way. So what I just sketched here is that the crossing probability by minuses is smaller or equal to 1/2, and therefore I must have no infinite cluster. Otherwise, it would tend to 1. Okay? So it's exactly the, I'm not rewriting it because it's a good exercise for you to try to run it yourself. It's exactly running the argument that I run for FK Ising in this case of this minus percolation. Okay. Except one thing that I didn't prove, but you can, this is also an excellent exercise. You need to prove FKG for the minus percolation, and this you can also prove exactly using the proof that I use for FK Ising. So no infinite cluster for minuses. So let us now prove that mu plus of sigma 0 So let us prove that mu plus beta c of sigma 0 is 0. Okay? Okay. What is mu free beta c of sigma 0? Well, by symmetry, it's just 0. Okay? But mu free beta c of sigma 0, what I can do is I can condition from extremely far away. Okay, I take a box of size n, so let's lambda n. And I'm just going to say explore all the cluster of pluses. So you have a box of size n. And here, condition on all the clusters of minuses intersecting the boundary of the box. Okay, you condition on all these guys. Maybe they go very deep in, but condition on the union of all the cluster of minuses intersecting the box. Let's call these clusters, the union of this cluster, C. Okay? So let's condition. So let's say this is the sum over C of mu beta C free of sigma 0 indicate a function that C equals C. Sorry. Okay, I decompose on this. Here I'm going to do two things. Either this cluster touch 0. Maybe these clusters, one of them gets to 0. Okay? In this case, the spin by definition is -1. So I get minus mu free beta C of 0 connected by minuses to the boundary of the box of size n. Okay? If this is not the case, then then 0 is in the complement of these clusters. Okay? But what is the measure if I condition on C equals C? What is the measure in the remaining sites? Conditioning on C equals C, it's a little bit like what we did for Bernoulli percolation. When you condition on that, you condition on all the spins inside your cluster to be minuses. But for the cluster to be exactly equal to C, what is the further information you need? You need all the neighboring vertices to be pluses. So conditioning on that is telling all these edges are minuses, all these sites are minuses, and all the neighboring ones are pluses everywhere. Right? Yes?
You also know that any other site on the boundary of the box is plus?
That the sites on the boundary, yes, sir?
Site on the boundary of the box that's not on one of your clusters.
I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
Right. The sites on the boundary of the box
Yeah.
are not on the clusters?
They are on the cluster. They are on the cluster. Yeah.
Those which are not on the cluster
Some of
are
them might not.
pluses.
Then they are pluses. Yeah, that's fine. They are pluses. Yeah. It's like they are on the boundary of an empty kind of. Yeah. Well, you're right. Notice here when I'm saying neighboring, I'm just saying neighboring in the sense of the primal graph, right? So they may be connected by diagonals, these guys. But that's fine. What is the distribution of the spin at 0 condition on that? Well, it exactly sees plus boundary conditions, this guy. So here you get mu plus in some graph which is kind of ZD minus, let's say, Z2 minus C bar, where C bar is C union the exterior boundary of C, like all the vertices that can be connected to C, of sigma 0. This is just a domain Markov property. But this thing is positive. So this whole thing here is larger or equal to 0. So what did I do? No, sorry. What am I doing? I'm not sure what I'm proving now.
This is
Yeah. What am I doing? No, sorry. That's not what I want to be doing. I don't want to say it's positive. I want to say it's larger or equal to mu plus. Yeah, I think. This is larger or equal to mu plus Z2 sigma 0. I could bound it by 0, but it's a little bit stupid. I could just bound it by the magnetization at infinity by monotonicity. Okay? So overall, then I'm summing over C, so I get that 0 is larger or equal to mu free beta C of 0 connected to the boundary by minuses plus mu plus beta C of sigma 0 times the sum of these guys when they don't contain 0. So this is not containing 0. And this is exactly 1 minus this. Or if you want, it's exactly mu beta c free of 0 not connected by minuses to the boundary. Right. And I lost a minus there. Yes. Let n tends to infinity. This tends to 0. This tends to 1. So I get 0 smaller or equal, larger or equal to mu plus beta c of sigma 0. And notice that the other bound is trivial. This I always get just because plus boundary conditions are favoring everything. So I really spelled all the details, but it's like almost a one-line argument. I mean, if you want to summarize this argument to somebody, you say, okay, the absence of infinite cluster for FK easing at criticality with free boundary condition implies ergodicity of the measure mu free. Therefore, it implies no minus infinite cluster, and this, by a trivial manipulation, gives you that mu plus is 0. So I think it's really it's difficult to prove uniqueness. So I mean to prove zero magnetization. Of course, here it is at the 5th lecture of a course. So we did prove things before. If you start from scratch, it's maybe not the shortest proof, but to the stage, where we were standing, it's definitely the shortest proof you can make out of this. Okay, that's the end of the lecture on the FK easing model. We will, actually, I'm not even sure we will reuse the FK easing model at some point, but we already proved some nice things with it. So now we are going to switch again a graphical representation and work with another one, which is called the random current model. So lecture 4. The random current model. So, up to now, each one of the graphical representation had an advantage and a disadvantage in some sense. The low and high temperature expansion, they were quite elementary. The low temperature expansion is maybe the most elementary representation. The high temperature expansion had an advantage, which was this kind of random walk interpretation of my spin-spin correlations. Okay. The FK easing model, the clear advantage there was the monotonicity properties combined with this percolation perspective. That was really the cool thing about it. But all these representations, they work very poorly when you are looking at what we call truncated correlations. So imagine, for instance, you are above criticality and you want to understand sigma 0, sigma x. Well, you know it doesn't go to 0, so you are not going to try to prove it goes to 0. What you want to prove is that this guy minus the limit, which was the magnetization squared, tends to 0. So you subtract, if you want, some kind of average of your spin-spin magnetization. You do sigma 0 minus the average times sigma x minus the average, and you take the correlation. So these truncated correlations, from the point of view of FK easing or high temperature expansion, they behave very poorly. So this is where the random current is going to be extremely powerful and much more powerful than this representation, is that it's going to be very suitable to express truncated correlations. Okay, so let's start with the definition of the model. Okay, so what is a current? Well, it's a big name. So N, a current, N is simply an integer valued function. It's simply a function from edges to the integers, to positive, to the non-negative, integers. And since we are in France, 0 is an integer. Okay? So n is just an element of n to the nothing else. Okay? And for simplicity, actually, I will always use a subscript notation just to avoid having parentheses everywhere and big notations. Okay? So this is a current. And a current is going to have exactly like the high temperature expansion, a current is going to have sources. So let's say rho n is a set of x in V such that the sum over xy an edge, so for the sum over every edge which is incident to x of nx wad is odd. Okay? So this is called the set of sources. So you can think actually of your current nxy, n, as the occupation time of a family of loops. Okay, let's say you take a sourceless current. Then it is the same as, it can be written as a union of loops that can actually pass through the same edge several times, and nxy will just be the number of times a loop is passing through this edge. Okay? It's an equivalence. Any sourceless current can be written as the occupation time of a family of loops, and any family of loops gives you a sourceless current when you look at the occupation time. The loops could actually pass themselves several times by the same. I'm not at all assuming any exclusion, self-avoidance of these loops. If I do, on the contrary, if I look at a current with sources, then it is the occupation time of a family of loops plus path pairing the sources of A. Okay? Since I already discussed a little bit that when I discussed the random walk representation of the high temperature expansion, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but you can keep in mind, for instance, that a sourceless, current with sources x and y necessarily contains a path of edges of positive current between x and y. It's necessary. Okay. Proposition. The sum over sigma of sigma A, so let's take A a subset of V, times exponential of minus beta edge G of sigma. This is equal to what? It's equal to 2 to the number of vertices in my graph times the sum of the currents with sources A of W beta of n, where W beta of n is the product for every edge in my graph of beta over nxy, beta to the nxy over nxy factorial. So here, notice the similarity with the high temperature expansion. There is a prefactor. It's not quite the same as before. It's just 2 to the number of vertices. Before we had 2 to the number of vertices, cosh to the number of edges. Here it's a slightly simpler one. We are also summing on spatial objects with a certain set of sources, exactly like the high temperature expansion. And we also have a weight. It was hyperbolic tangent of beta to the number of edges for the high temperature expansion. Here is just this guy. Okay? So beta to the nxy divided by nxy factorial. So how do you get this? Well, you do exactly, but really exactly like in the case of the high temperature expansion, except that instead of using that exponential of beta sigma x sigma y is cosh beta plus sigma x sigma y sinh beta, you just use something even simpler, which is a Taylor expansion of this. You just write this as a sum over nxy equals 0 to infinity of beta to the nxy over nxy factorial times sigma x sigma y to the nxy. You use this and you run exactly the same lines, meaning you expand, you exchange the sums, you are going to have a sum of a sigma x to the sum of nxy, and if this thing is always even, you are fine. If this thing is odd for a certain vertex, you get 0. So this, I leave it to you. Run the same proof. As a high temperature expansion. But a direct corollary of this is that sigma A is just a sum over currents with sources A of W beta of n divided by currents with no sources. Okay. So this gives me a nice representation, alternative representation for spin-spin correlations. I mean, how do we do now if we want to get the same representation for plus boundary conditions? So remark. If you want to get the same representation for plus boundary condition, you do exactly the same game as you did for the high temperature expansion, meaning that you have your graph G, which is embedded in ZD. It's a subgraph of ZD. Where you just allow, I mean, you also define the current on edges which are exiting my graph. And then here, instead of getting that, you get the sum over these currents, except that it's only the intersection with E, with the edges of my graph. I mean, with the vertices on my graph, sorry, which must have sources A. Okay? This we already did fairly carefully for the high temperature expansion. So here we just end up with the same manipulation to get the plus boundary conditions. I realize that I'm taking way too much time. So I'm going to skip a whole section and just give it to you as an exercise. I'm not going to reuse it, don't worry. So it's and it's really a cool exercise, actually. And this one, maybe if, well, first, Franco will be absolutely delighted to answer your question on it. And if he doesn't manage, which I'm sure he will, then I can also correct it. So exercise. We have a bunch of representations, so that would be, and he's sleeping, so, he doesn't even hear. Ah, no, he's not, he's here. Look at how happy he looks. Okay, good. So exercise. Define three things. So you define eta. Yeah, you define eta, which is a high temperature expansion in the following sense. The probability of eta is hyperbolic tangent of beta to the number of edges in eta, indicator function that eta is a sourceless current, sourceless high temperature expansion, divided by the sum of hyperbolic tangent of beta, or divided by z, where z is just a renormalization constant. So you pick a high temperature expansion at random. Okay? Define now n hat, which is what we call the trace of the random current. And the probability of eta hat, of n hat, is, well, it's equal to, let's say, the sum of a n, of a sourceless currents of W beta of n indicator than n hat, so is equal to n0. I'm going to tell you when n hat is, divided by z prime, where z is a partition function, and n hat of a current is equal to 1 if nxy is positive and 0 otherwise. So it's just a trace of my current. Okay? It's just saying it's positive, okay, I'm open. It's 0, I'm closed. Okay? So here is just the probability of this n, or maybe let's put n and m to avoid having. So the probability of n hat, and it's just a distribution on edges, on open and closed edges. And the probability of my distribution is just, I take the trace of my currents. I look at the probability that this trace is exactly equal to my n hat, and I get my distribution. And the last one, omega, is just the random, it's the FK Ising configuration. So there, the probability of omega is, well, it's just phi 0 gp of omega, where p is equal to 1 minus e to the minus 2 beta. Okay? These are the three percolation models that we manipulated since the beginning. This was the high temperature expansion, the FK Ising. And here I'm just saying my currents are not, it's not a percolation model because it's an integer valued edge function. Well, I kind of project it by saying positive is open, 0 is closed, and it gives me a percolation model. Okay? And the question is, how do you relate these three guys? So question 1, try to see from the expansion either in e to the beta sigma x sigma y or in terms of the Koch and Sinch, try to see that in fact eta hat, n hat is eta supremum with alpha, where alpha alpha is a Bernoulli percolation. of parameter 1 minus 1 over cosh. Okay? And here the hint is that maybe the odd and the even part of the current has an interpretation in terms of high temperature expansion. The edges which have odd current and the edges which have even current. That's the first step. Second step is try to check that omega is equal to eta supremum beta, where beta is the Bernoulli-Percourt of parameter hyperbolic tangent of beta. And this is going to be a little bit harder, but it's a little bit like what we did with the Edwards-Sokal coupling. So you are going to try to couple eta and omega. And in order to see this thing, well, there is some kind of reverse procedure, which would be how do you go from omega to eta. And let me give it to you, because it's kind of a dual thing, and it's going to help you proving this. Prove that eta is, so this is always in law, huh? It's identity in law. Eta can be obtained from omega by picking a uniform even subgraph of omega. So if you want to obtain omega from eta, you add new edges uniformly independently with a certain intensity, which is hyperbolic tangent of beta. If you want to go the other way, you pick omega, and then you pick a uniform even subgraph at random. You have a finite number of even subgraph, right? Even meaning even degree at every vertex. You have a finite number of them. You pick one of them at random, uniformly. So this is the procedure if you want to go from eta to n hat by opening edges according to this distribution. You can actually go from n hat to omega by opening edges, right? Because these are two Bernoulli random variables. So I could also have told you, prove that omega is n hat sup with some gamma, where gamma is the right distribution. And to go back there, you pick a uniform even subgraph at random. Okay? Okay, since I'm not going to use this in the future, I'm just going to ignore it and go to the important thing in the last 15 minutes, which is how you use this high temperature expansion. And the idea is that we are going to use not just one Ising model, but two Ising models in some sense. We are going to work with two Ising models on top of each other. I'm going to try to go streamline because we don't have so much time. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what I mean by duplication of spins, but I'm going to tell you what is the fundamental object that we are going to look at. The fundamental lemma. Our fundamental lemma, I guess, which is called the switching lemma. So as I said, I'm not going to look at just one Ising model. I'm going to look at two of them. So in particular, if I expand both of them, I'm going to have two currents. And the switching lemma is a way of removing sources from one of the two currents to put it in the second one. Because there is something here which is maddening in some sense, is that we are looking at quite different objects. So we cannot interpret it as the probability of something. Remember, in the high temperature expansion, we really interpreted the spin-spin correlation as the green function of a certain object, not as the probability of something. So here we would like to have the same current, source of currents here to be able to say something like, oh, it's the sum of a sourceless current having a certain property divided by the sum of sourceless currents. And the switching lemma is exactly what will allow us to do that. So the switching lemma is saying the following. If you sum on two currents, one has sources at A, the other one at B, and you sum a certain functional of n1 plus n2. Okay? You are just measuring something which is expressed in terms of the sum of the two. Then this is equal to the sum. So what I would like is to be switching the sources here of n2 to the sources of n1. So ideally, what I could hope is to be getting this. Just maybe I'm just allowed to switch like that. Notice here I'm putting the symmetric difference because when you take the sum of two currents with sources A and B, the sources of the sum is a symmetric difference of the set of sources. It's sum modulo 2. So I could hope to be getting that, but notice one simple observation is that if B is equal to A, right? If B is equal to A and I'm taking sigma, so this is just a parenthesis to remember that this cannot be true. If I look at this thing, which you know is smaller than 1, right? This is the ratio between sourceless currents and guy with sources A. So if I was able to switch the sources of N2 to N1 without paying anything, I would be getting this, and the same thing at the top, I would be getting 1. So for sure, this is not right. But the beautiful thing about the switching lemma is that the difference is not very big. The difference is just that N1 plus N2 hat, so the trace of the sum of the two currents, need to satisfy something, and what it needs to satisfy is that it needs to be in in FB, the event that I introduced for the random cluster model. So this is the switching lemma. Notice if B is just xy, here it just means that indicator of N1 plus N2 hat belongs to FB, just means indicator that X is connected to Y in N1 plus N2 hat. Okay? So it means there must be a path from X to Y in the sum of the two currents. A path of positive edges. Okay? I have only 10 minutes left, so I'm going to give you applications of the thing, and we start by the proof tomorrow. Okay? Just then because I'm going to do the proof tomorrow, there is an additional thing that you can do with it, which is going to be very useful for us in this special class. It's actually, it was not used so much in when it was found, this thing, but now it's crucial. By the way, I think that the switching lemma under this form, really, and the use of it is due to Eisenman in '82. even though some weaker version of it appeared in Griffiths, Hurst, and Sherman. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say is that here I took N1 and N2 on the same graph, on a graph G. But one thing that is going to be crucial for us is that we would like, when we will prove continuity of the phase transition in dimension D, for instance, we want to be relating the plus boundary condition to the free one. So in the high temperature expansion, one of the current is on a bigger graph than the second one. One is on the graph plus the edges emanating from it. So here, we would like to have actually that N1 is on H and N2 on G, where G is included in H. And we want to switch the sources here to here. Okay? It's still possible. The only thing that is going to change is that this should be true in G. So the current, when restricted to G, when restricted to the small graph, needs to have the connection that we want. Okay? Good. So now let's write a few applications of that. First one is if I look at sigma A, sigma B, just the correlation, let me do, yeah, okay. Sigma A, sigma B like that. So this is the sum. So when I put sigma A, sigma B, I could put sigma of A symmetric difference with B, it would be exactly the same, right? I mean, if a vertex appears in A and B, then it's squared, so it doesn't change a thing. So here, I can put A symmetric difference B divided by sourceless. But now here, I can just add a dummy variable. I can add a second sourceless current. What am I doing? Oh, sorry. Now sigma A GB times sigma B, G beta. Now this guy, how do we express it? Well, it's the sum of N1 equal A, W beta of N1, times sum N2 equal B, W beta of N2, divided by sourceless times sourceless. But here, this double sum is just this term with G equal H. There is no problem. And F equal 1, equal just identity. So this can just be rewritten as the sum of a sourceless, of a currents with sources asymmetric difference B and second currents with no sources of W beta of N1 times W beta of N2 times indicator function of N1 plus N2 belongs to FB. Right? Divided by the sum times the sum of a sourceless. Right? So how? So this is a switching lemma. How can I relate this quantity to this one? Well, here what I can do is I can just add a dummy variable and I get ratio over currents N1 with sources asymmetric difference B, currents N2 no sources, divided by two currents with no sources. And here I get sum over currents N1 with asymmetric difference B, sum over second currents with empty sources, divided by two sourceless, except that here at the top, I have this additional condition. So overall, sigma A, sigma B is just sigma A, sigma B times the sum of the first current with sources asymmetric difference B, second current with no sources of W beta of N1, W beta of N2, times the indicator function of N1 plus N2 belongs to FB, divided by sum of this thing. What is much better now than before is that the object I'm summing on at the top are the same as the object I'm summing on at the bottom. So if you define, say, P A of n to be just W beta of n indicator function that n has sources A divided by a renormalization constant. So if you imagine that you sample at random a current with sources A, then how can I rewrite this whole thing here? This is just the probability if I sample one current with sources A symmetric difference with B, a second current with no sources of the event that N1 plus N2 hat belongs to FB. So sigma B is sigma A times sigma B, the product of the correlation, is equal to the correlation of the product times the probability of something. You deduce two things from it. First, this probability is smaller or equal to 1. That's obvious. And what does it tell me, this? It gives me the second Griffiths inequality. So probability smaller than 1 gives second Griffiths inequality. But you see here what you gain compared to the two proofs that we had of Griffiths inequality, right? We had via like this simple argument via the first Griffiths inequality in the first class. We had the argument through FKG for the FK Ising model. Here we have yet a third argument, but this one has a huge advantage on the two others, is that it actually gives me an expression for the defect. It tells me that sigma A, sigma B minus sigma A, sigma B is sigma A, sigma B times the product, times the probability of N1 plus N2 is not in FB. Okay? And this is going to be extremely useful for us. So, for instance, one thing that we are going to use is that sigma A plus minus sigma A I let you try, but this is exactly saying this is sigma A plus G beta times probability sources A times probability sourceless of N1 plus N2 hat not in FA in G. And here's the only thing that you need to be careful when you put the plus boundary condition is that here I'm going to put this notation to say that the first current is on a big graph, okay, and the second on a small one. Here I could have referred to So this I let you check. It's exactly the same use of the switching lemma. So here, just to summarize, for instance, if A is equal to xy, just two vertices, it's saying the correlation, the spin-spin correlation for the plus state minus the spin-spin correlation for the free state is equal to the spin-spin correlation for the plus state times probability that x is not connected to y in G by my sum of currents. So it's going to look like something like that, that the two guys are not connected. And this is going to be, here you see something a little bit like this pivotality that we had in the case of our proof for FK-Ising of sharpness. Okay? The last tiny thing I want to say is that notice that here it's really, I mean, you have to think of, we are actually expressing squares of spin-spin correlation. It's really this product of spin-spin correlations. This looks like just one guy, but it's because inside it has already the two things. So, for instance, sigma A, what we usually refer to is that sigma A squared here is equal to what? It's equal to, so if you just look at sigma A squared, it's equal to sigma A, so this is 1. And here, it's the probability, the symmetric difference is empty. So here, I'm just looking at the probability in G empty set. I take an independent second current, and I look at, if you want, N1 plus N2 hat in FA. So notice the analogy with the Ising model, the FK Ising model. For the FK Ising model, if you remove the square, you get the probability for the FK Ising model of the event FA. Here, if you put the square, you get the probability of FA for another percolation model, which is much more complex to define, which is I pick two independent sourceless currents, I put them together, and I look at the trace. Okay? But the things that are driving us for the FK-Ising model, the intuition, will also drive us here. Okay? And I'm really over time, so, by 4 minutes, it's almost nothing. Well, thank you very much.